أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسلام علي يوم ولدت ويوم أموت ويوم أبعث حيا ذلك عيسى ابن مريم قول الحق الذي فيه يمترون صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين. I bear witness that there is one God, Allah. I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is the last, the final messenger of Allah, after whom no prophet, old or new, will come. And I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. I begin my presentation on the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, Mary's son, with quotation from the Qur'an taken from chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. I translate these verses as follows. Peace be upon me, the day I was fathered, the day I die, and the day I am raised to life. This is Jesus, Mary's son. It is a statement of fact about which they doubt. From the verses of the Quran, we will note that there are three interrelated stories surrounding the birth of Jesus Christ. There's first of all the story of Mary's mother. Then there's the story of Zacharias. And then there is story about Mary herself. Mary's story goes a little further and it gives us conversations between Mary and God leading up to Jesus' conception. We are also going to look at how we can correct the fake news that surround the birth of Jesus Christ and the experiences of Mary, and separate fake news from fact. The mother of Mary is mentioned in chapter 3, verses 35 to 37. And what we are told here is that she said, I entrust whatever is in my womb solely devoted to you, O Allah. Now, I want to explain that there are words in Arabic which are used here. First of all, the word Rabb. Used so many places in the Quran, translated often as Lord. But Rabb is that being who creates, then nurtures the creation until it attains perfection. And so I prefer to translate the word Rabb as nurturer and Rabbi as my nurturer. So a woman of Amran said, my nurturer. Now, there is also in the Quran two words that are used about the devil. One is Iblis and one is Shaitan, and they are not interrelated. When the word Iblis is used in the Quran, it applies to internal negative influences, bad ideas that occur in the mind. The Quran says, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فَجُورَهَا. And when Shaitan is used, it refers to external negative influences and inducements that exist in the environment. It is the coming together of both of these, Iblis and Shaitan, that brings about a sinful action. The Quran uses in this particular verse, I have named her Mary and I entrust her and her children to you for protection from Shaitan, which means negative influences and inducements from the environment that can lead her astray. So that Mary's mother prayed for two things. One is Mary's protection and secondly, Mary's children's protection. We are told in the Quran that Allah accepted that prayer of Mary's mother. He did protect Mary. He protected her by putting her under the protection of Zacharias, under the care of Zacharias, the guardianship of Zacharias, and later on by putting her in the care of her husband through marriage. Now, if we summarize the story of Mary's mother, we will see that although Mary's mother dedicated Mary to the service of Allah, that was no barrier to Mary getting married and having children, because she asked Allah to protect Mary and her children, so she intended that Mary should have children. It is important to note here that the Quran says that Allah made Zacharias Mary's guardian, because there are two occasions in which the guardianship of Mary and the care of Mary is mentioned. One is Zacharias appointed by Allah, and we will see later on what the other is. We come now to Zacharias, the story of Zacharias, mentioned in two places in the Quran, just as the incidents of Mary and her giving birth are mentioned in chapter 3 and chapter 19. Zacharias' incidents and story are mentioned in chapter 3 and chapter 19 as well. In chapter 3, we see Zacharias had a prayer in circumstances that are parallel to what Mary's mother made. Zacharias also prayed for a child, just as Mary's mother did. Allah accepted his prayer and told him further. And note what Allah has told Zacharias. He gave him good news of John. And John is called the Musaddiqan Bikalimatin. Musaddiq means the one who confirms, and Kalima means a prophecy. So John is the one who is going to confirm that prophecy. What is that prophecy? The confirmation was that Elijah or Elias would precede the Messiah, and the prophecy is that of the coming of the Messiah. That is why the prayers of Zacharias and the incidents and story of Zacharias is linked with the story of the birth of Jesus. Because Jesus himself identified John as the Elias or Elijah. When he was asked, if you are the Messiah, where is the Elias who is supposed to precede you? And he said, he indicated that Elias has already appeared among you, and referred to John. But when Zacharias prayed for a son, he identified, when he was given good news of a son, he identified that there were two barriers, two impediments. One is that his wife is infertile, and secondly, that he is getting on in age. When we look at the two incidents about Zacharias in the story of Zacharias in chapter 3 and chapter 19, we will see that some expressions are different from chapter 3. That which is mentioned in chapter 19 is different from, in some cases, from that which is mentioned in chapter 3. In chapter 3, verse 40, for example, Zacharias says his wife is infertile. But in chapter 19, verse 5, Zacharias says his wife was infertile. The word kanat is used there, which means the past tense of to be. His wife was. That word has been added in the Quran in the response of Zacharias when he identified the impediments to the birth of a child. Now, it is in summarizing the story of Zacharias, we will see that even though Zacharias was old and his wife was infertile, Zacharias still prayed for a child. And in granted this prayer, Zacharias was informed of the importance of John as the forerunner or the harbinger of the Messiah that the children of Israel were waiting for. In giving a reply to an answer to that prayer of Zacharias, Zacharias identified two impediments. And it means that he knew these impediments to giving birth to a child are removable. If Zacharias knew that his wife was infertile and he's old and could not have children, why then would he have prayed that he should have children, that he should have offspring? It means that he knew that those offspring, that those impediments, those barriers are in fact removable. So what were the impediments that Zacharias presented? He wondered, my nurturer, how can there be a son for me as age has caught up with me? My wife is infertile. In chapter 3, he says so. And then Allah replied, even so, Allah achieves whatever he wishes, and Zacharias was too old perhaps to find a new wife at the time. That was one way of removing one of the impediments. But later on in chapter 19, Zacharias knew that conception, giving birth to a child, required lawful sexual relations in marriage. His wife was infertile and he was too old to find a new wife perhaps. But Allah comforted Zacharias by removing the impediment of his wife's fertility, and then with speech fasting they both give birth to John. He fasted for a certain period of time. The fasts that were given in chapter 3 and in chapter 19 are a bit different, but on both occasions, Zacharias asked for a sign and he was given different instructions that rejuvenated him and made him capable of, in fact, producing offspring. We come now to Mary, the story of Mary. This story is referred to in chapter 3 and in chapter 19 as well. There are some facts about Mary that we'll see in the Qur'an that are very significant. Surah Maryam, an entire chapter, is named after her, for example. It is important to note that she was of the family of Amram, which means she was of the house of Levi. She was of the lineage of Aaron, the priestly class. She was not of the house of Judah, and she was not a descendant of David. The Messiah was supposed to be a descendant of David, and therefore Jesus could not have been a Messiah if he was only a descendant of Mary. We note in these verses of the Quran that Allah spoke to Mary via an angel or angels, and we note that Mary grew up with excellent morals in a secluded place, in a cloister. Let us look at the conversations between Mary and Allah. There are 3 conversations that Mary had with Allah through an angel or angels. The first of these conversations occurred when Mary resided in a cloister under the care of Zacharias. You remember that it was after that Zacharias prayed for and was given news of his son. And on the first occasion, when the angels spoke to Mary, she was told that Allah has made you cleanse, taharaki. And that word taharaki means cleanse from menstrual discharge. And she was now able to join in public prayer. Why that is important is that it indicates to us that Mary had now reached the age of puberty. We learn from this conversation that Mary is living in a cloister and she has attained puberty. Allah tells us and tells Mary that she is preferred above other women. We are also told Mary is to move out of the cloister and pray in public. Allah informs us that a partner for Mary is being arranged. Mary's first guardian was Zacharias, who was appointed by Allah. Mary's second guardian, her partner or husband, was made by selection after she attained puberty, and there was a reason for that. So it is not the same. This mention in chapter 3, verse 44, of making a selection as to who would have Mary's partner, was done by the people, whereas the first guardian, Allah appointed Zacharias as the guardian. On the second occasion, when the angel spoke to Mary, she is informed about, again, the word kalima, a kalima, which means a prophecy from Allah. And the prophecy is about Al-Masih, the Messiah, who will be Jesus and also Mary's son. Chapter 3, verse 45 tells us that Mary is given good news of a prophecy from Allah, and that his name will be the Messiah. He will be Jesus, Mary's son. So that the Messiah would come from the house of David, and Mary was not of that lineage. This is why there was a dispute as to who would be her husband. There had to be a selection, because that person had to be from the lineage of David. Remember, there were several tribes of Israel. Some of them, there were the Samaritans, there were the Pharisees, there were the Sadducees, there were the Levites, there were Jews, there were the Benjamin, tribe of Benjamin. Of course, all the 12 tribes were not there. Some had already migrated and remained in Afghanistan and in Kashmir and in those northern areas of modern-day Pakistan. So that we are told here that when Mary is given news of this prominent individual, a special child, and that her son will be a special person, he will be the Messiah, and to fulfill the prophecy of that Messiah, Jesus must be of the lineage of David through his father. So by naming Jesus as the Messiah, Allah is telling Mary that the father of her child will be a descendant of David. So like Zacharias, Mary is surprised and identifies an impediment. At this second conversation now, Mary queried the expression, son of Mary, or Mary's son. And we learn from this conversation that Mary knew the requirement of a pregnancy was lawful sexual relations within marriage. How can I have a son and a man has not yet touched me? And that expression, not man yet not touching me, is used in the Qur'an to mean lawful sexual relations within marriage. So Mary knew the requirement for her pregnancy was lawful sexual relationships within marriage. But up to this time in her life, she was still living in the cloister and not married. So here, the impediment is that she had not yet had the opportunity for marriage. And this is in chapter 3 of the Quran. We go now to chapter 19 of the Quran, and we'll see that this is a third conversation that Mary is having, not with angels, as in chapter 3, but with an angel. It is different. So only one angel is speaking with her. She's no longer in the cloister. She is still not yet married. And she, in addition, we see she's protecting herself from promiscuity. Because when the angel appeared as a full human being, obviously, she could have felt that he would perhaps do something to her, attack her. So she said, but he was being cautious because the angel didn't appear as an angel, appeared as a human being and was also being cautious in order to allow Mary to have a conversation with him. And he said, I am just a messenger. I am just bringing a message from your nurturer. And what is that message? I will give you a pure son. I here referring to Allah. Allah will give you a pure son. Now Mary gave not one answer as in chapter 3. She gave two answers. She raises two questions and raises two impediments. In chapter 3, she spoke only of one impediment. I am not yet married. No man has yet touched me. Here she says, how can I have a son when a man has not yet touched me? In other words, I'm not yet married. Nor have I been promiscuous. In other words, I have not flirted. I have not had illegal sexual relationships. And then Allah replied, the matter has already been arranged. We can see clearly here in the Quran that the barriers, the impediments for Mary to have a son must be removed by Allah before the prophecy is fulfilled. You have an important personality, significant prophecy that the Jews were waiting, the children of Israel were waiting for, the Messiah. And we will think that that Messiah would be an illegitimate offspring of Mary. So the impediment must be removed by Allah before the prophecy is fulfilled and that Mary would bear a son. Allah assures her that it is easy for Him to remove any barrier, any impediment. But what is easy to Allah? Mary had moved out of the cloister into a freer society now. Which impediment should Allah remove? Should He arrange for her marriage, or should Allah arrange for her to be promiscuous? She points out there are two impediments, there are two problems. I'm not yet married and I'm not promiscuous. So that should Allah arrange for Mary to be promiscuous or that she should be married? Mary is constantly referred to as she who guarded her chastity, she who protected herself from promiscuity. The word ahsanat is used about her, meaning guarding chastity through marriage. Mary was thus a married woman. The Quran is quite clear on this. So we looked at what the Quran says. We have not gone outside of the teachings of the Quran or the verses of the Quran. We look now at the facts and the fake news. We must remember that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Lahori, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam and the Mujaddid of the age who came as the second Jesus, has said, and I want to quote his words, "वो ज़माना जो कुछ अरसे पहले इससे गुजर गया है, वो जहलाना तकलीद का ज़माना था, और ये ज़माना जिसकी हम ज़ियारत कर रहे हैं, ये अकल की बद इस्तेमाल का ज़माना है। पहले इससे अक्सर लोगों को नामाकूल तकलीद ने खराब कर रखा था, अब फिक्र और नज़र की गलती ने बहुतों की मिट्टी पलीद कर दी है." Easily translated, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Lahori is telling us that the period just before our time was an era of slavish acceptance of ignorance. But this age in which we live is a time of the wrong use of reason. Whereas previously people succumbed to blind following. Whatever they were told, they would believe. Nowadays, the wrong use of reason and thinking throws dust in your eye. This is what we have, and it's called fake news. Things that are false are perpetuated and people begin to believe them. They don't use their reason. So today we explored the birth story of Jesus and sifted out fake from facts. Let's look at the fake and the facts in a while. Luckily, we have two powerful tools to help us fact check the story. Firstly, we have the Quran. This is a direct first-hand account from Allah about the matter. The Quran tells us about the birth of Jesus. People have doubts. But this is a qawl haq. It's a statement of fact. Allah gives us a no-frills account, clears up all the misconception and guides us about the key elements of the story. If only we would think, as I have done, and put them in a logical manner. Because we have our intelligence. God has blessed us with the ability to distinguish right from wrong, truth from falsehood. You know when something doesn't smell right about a story, you get a gut feeling that things are too good to be true. Your brain is a powerhouse of rationale and reason. So Allah encourages us in the Quran to use our intelligence. Join me now as we separate the fake from the fact. Let us look at the Immaculate Conception. Fake news tells us that God miraculously made Mary pregnant without a mate. The fact is, Mary and her husband conceived Jesus naturally. If Mary gave birth to Jesus without the agency of a father, is Mary greater than God? Even God, even Allah cannot have a son without a mate, without a consort, without a partner. The Qur'an is clear on this. In chapter 6, verse 101, Allah says, how could He, Allah, have a son without a mate? So if Allah cannot have a son without a mate, how could Mary do that? The Quran is quite clear. Use your reason. So far as the virgin birth is concerned, fake news tells us that Mary was unmarried and a virgin at the birth event, at the time of birth. The fact is that virgin birth is not a Quranic concept. Jesus was born naturally of a mother and a father. The Quran is clear on this matter. Remember, there was no doctor, midwife, or gynecologist to confirm that Mary was a virgin. We are the witnesses to this miracle, or so-called miracle. We look at the, again, miraculous birth, so-called miraculous birth. Fake news tells us that Mary's birthing of Jesus was a miraculous event. But the fact is that Jesus was born like any other child. When the Quran tells us, when she became pregnant with him, she withdrew with him to a remote place, and the gushing of water made her go towards a palm trunk. So clearly, Mary conceived and delivered Jesus just as women normally would have children. Even her water broke and she went towards a palm trunk. So a miracle is an unusual act which takes place before the public to satisfy and convince others, if we think of miracles. Nobody could know that Mary conceived a child without intercourse with a male human being. There is not a single witness to this alleged miracle. Obviously, this is a private matter between Mary and her husband. So there's no evidence whatever of any kind of miraculous birth occurring in the conception and giving birth to Jesus Christ by Mary. We look at the expression Father of Jesus, the concept of the Father of Jesus. Fake news constantly repeat to us that Jesus was born without a father. Now, without a father, Jesus could only have been a girl, and he could not have been the Messiah, because the Messiah had to be a descendant of David, and Mary was not of that lineage. So he had to have a father to be the Messiah. The Quran tells us that. It's a prophecy that had to be fulfilled. But the male is not like the female, the Quran says. Jesus could only be a male if his mother became pregnant with the Y chromosome from the father. So if Jesus had no father, then he would be born as a girl. It's quite obvious. Science tells us this. Knowledge and logic tells us this. Where, therefore, is this? Why do we, therefore, perpetuate this fake news that Jesus was born without a father? There are some who say, well, God was Jesus' father. But Jesus describes himself as wulidtu, I was fathered. And the Quran says, lam yalid, Allah does not father any child. So Jesus says, peace be upon me, the day I was born, or the day I was fathered, or the day I was given birth to. That's the fact of the Quran. Where did we get this idea that God was Jesus' father when the Quran says, lam yalid, Allah does not give, is not the father of anyone. Another argument is put forward that compares the likeness of Jesus with Adam. Fake news tells us that Jesus was born like Adam without a father. And the verse of the Quran that is quoted is in chapter 3, verse 59, that says, the likeness of Jesus with Allah is truly as the likeness of Adam. He created him from dust and said to him, let possibility become reality, kun fayakun. But this is not a comparison of Jesus' birth with Adam's birth, because Adam had no mother, and Jesus did have a mother. The comparison here had to be the life of Jesus. Jesus was a prophet, Adam was a prophet. Adam died, Jesus also died a natural death. But certainly there's not a comparison so far as birth is concerned. So in summarizing this presentation on the birth of Jesus, we will see that Mary and her husband conceived Jesus. Jesus had a human father. The Qur'an refers to his father. Jesus was a normal human being. The Qur'an is quite clear that Jesus was born naturally with both a mother and father. The Qur'an nowhere speaks of Jesus having been conceived miraculously, nor is a statement anywhere contained in the Qur'an that Jesus had no father. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Azim wa nafa'ana wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikr al-hakim innahu ta'ala jawadun kareem malikun barur raufur rahim. Assalamu alaikum. You have just viewed a production of Namus Media. Namus Media is a frontier project to present the Lahore Ahmadiyya understanding of Islam to a digital audience. We will prove to you that Islam is relevant in this age of modern technology. Join us for weekly Jummah on YouTube. Enroll in digital events that inspire hope and renew faith. Follow us on your favorite social media platforms. Share the content with those you love. I believe that you can play a role in this mission. We need your help. Visit us at www.namus.media to learn how.